rules enforcement and arbitration. So this is kind of the why do I care about any of this? Well, we should care, right? We're bankers, we're rule followers. We hope that all of our customers and clients are rule followers, but really the NACHA rules exist to tell us as participants in the network how we should be processing these entries, right? And when participants are not processing their entries within the rules, it really hurts the integrity of the network. And it really downgrades the quality of the network. And we want to promote compliance for everybody and reduce risk for all of the participants within the network. So NACHA has the system of fines. So the system of fines, or the national system of fines, that is the rules enforcement mechanism for the ACH network. So this is where NACHA has the ability to take complaints or reports of potential rules violations and work with the participants to see what's going on, right? Do you just need more education, or are you harming the network and maybe some fines need to be assessed, right? That's what they're really looking at here. But really, I mentioned the purpose already. We want to have quality and integrity within the ACH network. We want you as an originator to know that the network is good, it's functioning. You're sending your entries, they are going to your receivers as you intend. Everybody is following the rules. We also want to have compliance with the rules. We want everyone to be a rule follower because that reduces risk for the network as a whole. So let's talk about rules enforcement participants. So we have the submitter, we have the respondent, and then we have NACHA, or the National Association. So NACHA's rules enforcement panel over there on the right is comprised of representatives of the network. So they are the ones that are going to look at that report of alleged rules violation from NACHA and say, do we need to assess some fines here? Like, do we need to do something different? This is what we're talking about here. So submitter and respondent are both financial institutions. So if you have an issue with another participant in the network, you would work with your financial institution to figure out, do we need to file a rules violation? What's going on here? Or on the other side of that, if you are not following the rules and not doing something you're supposed to be doing, CCF Bank could receive a report of possible rules violation against you as an originator, for example. And you have an agreement with CCF Bank, right? You have your ACH origination agreement. If there are fines that are assessed, that could be passed along to you per that agreement that you have with the financial institution. So not only do we want to be a rule follower, do we want to keep the network, operating well, we want to make sure that network is reducing risks for everybody involved. We also want to avoid fines, right? So let's talk about some of the types of issues that are reported. So starting at the top, unauthorized entries, right? This would be entries where that receiver is going to their institution and saying, I didn't authorize that. A lot of times you're probably just going to make a return. You might receive a return and that might be the end of it. But the receiving institution could say, you know what, we're tired of this. We've had so many unauthorized entries from this one originator. We're going to file a report of a possible rules violation. At that point, NACHA could get involved. Entries to invalid account numbers. So we kind of talked about that notification of change. If you weren't responding to that, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and you're continuing to send entries to invalid account numbers, that could be a type of issue, or that is a type of issue that NACHA sees quite often. Failure to provide proof of authorization. So if CCF Bank receives a request from an RDFI requesting proof of authorization, they're going to come to you and ask for that proof of authorization. Failure to provide that is one of the top issues that's reported. Similarly, a failure to provide a copy of a written statement of unauthorized debit. This is the document that receiving institution obtains from the receiver when they're disputing those unauthorized transactions. So the ODFI does have the opportunity to request a copy of that. Failure to provide it would be a rules violation. Invalid check conversion, so taking checks, converting those to ACH, but not doing it within the rules is an issue that's often reported. Incorrect standard entry class code. Again, we have a lot of folks in the network that are just like, why does it matter? Why do I care what standard entry class code I use? Well, remember we talked about the risk of returning those entries and the fact that the rules say you need to use the proper standard entry class code. So it could lead to rules enforcement. Let's see, non-response to notification of change. So we mentioned that already, right? You as the originator received that notification of change with all of that information that we talked about. And if you do nothing with it, which we joke around that NOC stands for no one cares, everyone should care because it is the #1 issue that's reported. So make sure that you as an originator are going to respond. You have a process for when we receive that notification of change that we do respond to those notifications of change. We're making those corrections. We're getting those account information set up the way that that notification of change says to have it before we're sending those next live entries. And then the last one there, untimely returns. So sending returns outside of the timeframes. This one's a little more on the financial institution side. I know I came from a small bank and I don't know how many times I would hear somebody say, let's just try it and see what happens. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to get it back as a dishonored return. And if you keep doing it, you're probably going to get a rules violation. So those are the things that I would encourage you to have systems in place at your organization to make sure you're not doing any of these things. Like I said, a few apply just to the financial institutions, but definitely think about what you could be doing with those notifications of change, those proof of authorizations, making sure you're using the proper standard entry class code, and that you're doing authorized entries with valid account information. All right, so the most filed violations. So we have a chart here. I mentioned non-response to NOC, no one cares, even though they should care. That's pretty high. That's like over half of the violations that NACHA sees. And this is looking at going through July of 2025. So that's the most recent data that we have related to violations. But we see other there that's going to comprise some of the things we talked about. But really looking here, think about what can we do as an organization to make sure we're not one of these statistics, right? That CCF Bank does not receive violations related to our origination because we are not doing the things listed on this slide and the slide before it. All right, and I saw a couple of questions coming in, a list of items on slide 47 and the descriptions. We are recording the session, so you're welcome to go back. I don't have notes that I can easily copy and paste for you, but we are recording the session, so you're welcome to share that recording with others or take down some notes, create your own slides or documents within your organization based on the content that I provided with that slide. All right, there's one other question about authorization, but we're going to wait just a moment and get through arbitration and we'll circle back to that one. All right, so arbitration. So this is a mechanism for resolving disputes. We talked about rules enforcement a moment ago. That's really just like fines and trying to get the behavior to stop. Arbitration is where someone has suffered a loss and we want to be compensated for damages that were caused by that violation. So thinking about unauthorized debits that go back for a year or maybe 2 years if we're talking about a consumer, things like that, where we're going to go after that other party and say, you owe us money for this. So it's a low cost, expeditious mechanism for resolving disputes between those parties. And really, we're doing this to stay out of court because that would be the other option, right? We could just sue the other party, but we could do it through arbitration as well. So what that looks like, we have our complainant and our respondent. Again, these are going to be the financial institutions. So if you have an issue that needs to go to arbitration, you would likely work through CCF Bank. They would make an arbitration claim against the respondent or the other financial institution. So that complaint is going to NACHA. NACHA is going to bring in a couple of arbitrators, 1 to 3, depending on the amount and the type of arbitration that we're doing. And those folks are going to basically hear the facts of the situation and make a decision. So we look at types of arbitration claims, starting at the top there, unauthorized entries and untimely returns, improper reversals, improper posting by the RDFI, and entries to invalid accounts. Those are the top types of arbitration claims that NACHA sees. So again, thinking back to when we talked about rules enforcement a few minutes ago, you'll want to think about, are we doing any of these? Are we doing improper reversals? Maybe we should put some better practices around that, make sure that we're within the rules for our reversals. Or are we sending unauthorized entries? Hopefully not. But if you are, make sure that you look at that practice and make sure we're getting valid authorizations, we're retaining valid authorizations, and we're only sending entries that truly are authorized and are going to valid account information or valid account numbers, proper standard entry class codes, proper TRAN codes, all of the things to make sure that those entries are going to just post automatically as they're intended, and we're not going to find ourselves the subject of an arbitration claim. All right, this is my last slide, and then we'll go into some questions, and I'll open it up to the CCF Bank folks and see if they have anything to add. So some best practices to avoid rules enforcement and or arbitration, right? We don't want to do either of these things. So understand that you as an originator, you are bound to the NACHA rules. That is through the ACH origination agreement that you have with CCF Bank. So as an originator, they have you signed to an ACH origination agreement that is required under those rules, and that binds you to the rules, meaning that if you're going to be a participant, you got to play by the rules. So hopefully you have access to those rules. If not, again, work with the CCF Bank folks. They will get you in touch with how you can purchase a copy of those rules or get a copy of those rules so that you know that you're in compliance. You want to ensure that all of your entries are properly authorized. We're not sending entries that are not authorized. Just because someone owes us money and we have their account information, right? We're not doing anything shady like that. All of our entries are truly authorized. And we're utilizing the most appropriate standard entry class code like we talked about earlier, right? If we have consumer receivers, we're using consumer standard entry class code based on that receiver type and that authorization method. Or if we have a non-consumer receiver and we're a non-consumer originator, we're using CCD and CTX. Again, proper standard entry class code for all of our entries to make sure we are within the rules. And then the last one here, responding appropriately to our notifications of change and our returns. If we get an NOC, we are making those changes that are specified within that notification of change, and we're doing that within the timeframes that are specified in the rules so that we're sending proper entries that have the right information, the most up-to-date information.